Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for joining us here. I'm going to introduce you now to Leslie Channon, who I have confirmed is American. So, Leslie, if you want to join me on the stage, and I will, there she is, the lovely Leslie is going to talk to you about all sorts of great things. So, I will leave it to you, Leslie. Over to you. Leslie, you're muted. You're muted, Leslie. You're muted. There we go.
Oh,
brilliant.
Yeah, well, someone had to do it today. So
that's it. Nobody else. You've set the tone now. Brilliant. Thanks, Leslie.
You. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, actually, I am American and English, but I've lived in both countries. So yeah, my accent has gone a bit wrong. So everyone is super interested in my accent. So good morning, everyone. Today, I've been asked to talk about data and beyond the data. And I think a lot of stuff is going on. So I've made lots of notes, but I'm an experienced public speaker, but there's several things that I just want to, I'm used to pacing, and I'm used to having a big audience in front of me and having big whizzy technical stuff behind me. So just bear with me that I'm actually sat down in my living room talking to you today. And then also I've had COVID and I'm suffering from long COVID. So my brain is not working as sharply as it has done in the past. So just bear with me if I start to be spacey or I have to check my notes. So I just thought I'd get that out there because I was a bit anxious about that this morning. So thank you all for joining. I want to start about what actually is data. And when I was preparing for this speech yesterday, I actually looked it up. I Googled it because I wanted to know what the dictionary's definition of data was. And it said facts and statistics collected together for reference and analysis. Now, I love data. I got my master's degree. I was all into the data. I love statistics. In my undergraduate degree, I fell in love with statistics. I had a fantastic statistics teacher that actually brought that to life and what you could actually do with it. So it wasn't just, a boring, innate, but being able to apply statistics, which lit it up for me. And I absolutely love it. And, but how many organizations collect data and then never use it? And that for me, when I was working as a research and policy officer for a big housing association, part of my job was to look at all of the surveys and the data and the equality and diversity information that we had, and to question, because I know that the whole thing is death by data. So for me, data can be really, really useful, but it's about what you are going to ask. I think that you need to know what you are going to ask and what you want to know before you collect the data. For me, that is like the key. And I think just kind of going back, so I just kind of looked at my notes. I think I'm going to be a bit scattery today. So the thing with data too, and this is the thing that I love about statistics, is that the government or anyone can put out, a headline, and people believe it. People absolutely believe it. So for example, I asked if I could talk about Brexit this morning and they said yes. So for Brexit, the tagline is overwhelming majority voted for Brexit. Overwhelming majority of the British public voted for Brexit. But as a statistician, I went, I actually looked. So it was 50-48. Okay, so it was a majority of the people that voted. But when you actually looked behind the data, a third of the actual electorate chose not to vote. So to use the tagline, overwhelming majority, is misleading. So I think a lot of time the data can be massaged to fit the story. And I was looking at the figures on the white paper yesterday, of, because they actually also, released all the evidence that was collected during the consultation for the green paper that I worked on. So when they published the white paper the other day, they also published all of the kind of research. And so I was digging through the research, and how many respondents and how many, and then I looked at like actually, underneath the data. So it's just really, really interesting. So I really like to dig. But I was talking to a chief exec like late last night, just talking about this data issue and how housing associations, I think, are missing a trick. So he was talking about, if you polled his tenants about Wi-Fi connectivity, the majority of residents don't have Wi-Fi or don't have broadband. So someone could then say, well, I guess we can't do anything digital. But then when you actually then turned around and asked them, did they have smartphones and did they have access to Facebook? Then there was 73% of respondents said that they did. So it's about, what is it that you want to do and what questions you need to ask? So that, therefore, they've just launched this app that has transformed the way that people interact with that particular landlord. So I think that that's really, really interesting. And the other thing that I kind of saw yesterday when I was doing research for this talk was, assumption is the mother of all mistakes. And I think that one of the things that I'm concerned about with this white paper, and I'm just still digesting it, is that the devil is in the details. And some of the things that they're on just this all on first reading, but some of the things that the government is asking the regulator to look at, the KPI measures or the, looking at the number of complaints, is not going to be the can opener that gives them the effect or the impact or the change that they actually want. So I think it's really, really important, one, to be able to consult with tenants on that level to say, what is it that you want to have change within the organization? And therefore, what data do we need to collect? What questions do we need to be asking to set the KPIs? And, for me, that is one of the keys. And then the other thing is, for me, is surveys. People just send out surveys, but what are you actually going to do with the survey? How is it going to make a difference? So if I fill out a survey, are you happy with your home? And I say no. What is going to happen with that? So I think a lot of tenants that I've spoken to, and I don't profess to speak for all tenants, but a lot of tenants that I've worked with or spoken to, is like their voice is never heard, even when they have a complaint, even when they speak up. This is what happened at Grenfell. They were kind of dismissed. So it's like kind of looking at how you can actually use data and the technology that we have, which I think, I was listening, I kind of dropped in yesterday to some of the sessions, and it was just amazing, the technology, the technology and the stuff that we can use with mapping and layering and finding out about, our tenants and then the communities in which we work. And I think that all of that technology is absolutely brilliant, but I think that some of the frontline staff in housing don't actually marry the data with being able to create the reality, like to be able to have that joined up thinking. And I think also yesterday I was listening and someone was talking about silo working. And I think that is just prevalent within the industry, like within an organization, they're doing their thing and then they don't actually think outside the box. And then they're doing their thing and they don't think outside the box. And the thing is that the government in the white paper is asking the ombudsman and the regulator to actually talk to each other. And I think that with organizations and the change that's coming through the implementation of the white paper, there are going to have to be more connectivity within the organization. And I think that IT and technology, but I think the people, I think that has so much capacity. But for me, it's about marrying that up and having the buy-in from the staff that actually, yes, it will help their job, or it will give them the information that they need. And I think that the other thing that was mentioned yesterday was about trusting the data that you have. And the organizations that I've worked with, kind of the whole historical data, and like, how do you then clean that data or go through the process of actually being able to trust that data for me. So I love delving down and looking at stuff. I mean, there was an example of, what does the data show you when you actually look at it? So part of my job when I was a policy and research officer was to look at one of the questions that was being asked is satisfaction, which is, a lot of people are focused on satisfaction and what that actually means. So I was working for an organization in South Oxfordshire, and they have predominantly white, aging, tenants. I mean, that's the kind of demographic, and that's the kind of demographic within the area in which they work. So we're not in, inner city London. So we were looking at the demographic and the equality, the kind of makeup of the tenants. And then they asked me to look at if there was a delineation between any of the equality strands. Like, was there a difference in satisfaction? So when I was digging down, so it came out that young black people, tenants, were more dissatisfied. So you can absolutely say, I know a lot of people have said this, well, the young just expect too much, and they're when you actually look at, then you kind of dig down into the data, and then you actually looked at the properties they were living in. So I looked underneath that headline, which can be quite inflammatory and dismissive of younger people, that they just should be grateful that they have a house type thing. So looking underneath the data, the older tenants tend to be in the former council houses. They have a secure tenancy. They're at social rent. The quality of their homes have been brought up to the decent home standard. The younger tenants are in affordable housing, which is 80% of the market rent, which in South Oxfordshire is not really affordable. And they're more likely to be in 0-hour contract jobs. They are, struggling to find work. So when you kind of look under the data, there's more to it. So then what can you put in place to enable those tenants to actually be more satisfied? So I mean, for me, I love data, and I think it's about telling the story and getting underneath. And they were talking yesterday about the lower super input output, all those. I mean, I'm not that technical, but just looking at being able to map stuff out, and then look at the properties, and then look at, for antisocial behavior, looking at certain areas, and then looking at where either intervention is needed, and then also working with other agencies, other stakeholders, to create communities that actually work. So I think that data has a huge part to play. I think that it's very underutilized within the sector. And I always talk about, when I have all my slides and stuff up, it's about the triangulation for me. Data is at the bottom, and then for me, tenants. So you kind of have to include tenants in that story, because I'm a tenant advocate. And you just ask the tenant, for me, in any kind of research, you can't just have the data and then that's it. You have to be able to quantify it, and you have to be able to have other areas that are all telling the same story. So if you have some data come up that people are unhappy in a certain area, then, you know, it's not brain surgery, you know, or like, you know, you just go and then ask the tenants, you know, what is going on, do some surveys, sit down and talk to them, have some focus groups, and then, you know, include them in the solution making. So what else was I going to talk about? And I think with this, I think with the social housing white paper, for me, I just had an article published this morning on Twitter through HQN talking about what wasn't in it, compared to the promises that were kind of made in the social housing green paper. But there are some amazing things in it that if the regulator is completely funded to be able to do what the government is asking it to do, and then tenants, the government is asking the regulator to work with tenants to create the service standards and what they want to have included. Now, I'm going to be advocating, and because anyone can say that they've, you know, we've like talked to tenants. Okay, so you've talked to, you know, Sally down the road, but I would like to see that it's a robust, and, you know, either by, you know, surveying hundreds of tenants, by having tenants at the table help make the decisions on what is going right and what is going wrong. I think focusing on the number of complaints is a big, huge red flag, because then what housing associations will do will just bury the amount of complaints that they have, and there's no learning there. So I think that there's a lot of things to unpick, and I think data is going to be really, really important, and the kind of structures around that to be able to capture that information is going to be really, really important. So I hope that I've made some sense. I don't know how much more time I have, or if someone is going to join me on stage for me to be asked some questions or to explain further on what we want to talk about for the rest of the time.
Hi, Leslie.
Thanks. Hi, Stuart.
We've got plenty of time, so don't worry. But we've got some questions already coming, so
that's good.
We can go. Gabby's just said a wild Stuart appeared. Gabby, you've known me for 3 months and you can't spell my name right. This is shocking. Okay, sorry about that. So on to more important things, Leslie. So in the questions, the one at the top at the moment, it says, is there a disconnect between how tenants use technology themselves or don't, and what the housing association provides or think they should provide? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that if you include tenants in the conversations, you will get the product that works for the organization and the tenants. Just having people sat around the table going, oh yeah, this is amazing, I would use this, blah blah. It's like, okay, so then I would, my first question would be, were tenants involved in the development of this? You know, that's the kind of, you know, answer.
I was going to say, in your experience, you know, is it especially, I mean, it's different around, well, is it different around technology? I mean, what's your experience of how HAs look at tenants when they're thinking about introducing new technology? Is it a case of they look at the individual, or do they look at tenants as a kind of an amorphous mass?
I think historically it's been just the mass, but I think now that we're getting younger people, and there is, you know, they're all, everyone is different, and each area within the country is different and has different needs. I mean, I live in an area that is predominantly white, is very conservative. I mean, you know, it was David Cameron's constituency, old, rural. So, you know, the issues are, you know, Wi-Fi connectivity and, you know, being able to travel, you know, if you're old and you live in a little village, are you going to be able to actually travel to participate? I know that the housing association I worked with, you know, provided transport to have that, you know, happen. So it's about looking at your, I think, demographic and being able to support tenants to be involved in that way. And I know that some, you know, I would say a third of housing associations do it and do it really well, and kind of get the payoff. I mean, one of the things I wrote about that I was really kind of disappointed in this morning, and I'm going to write some more about it because it kind of surrounded a lot of my master's dissertation research, was there was a report that was done in 2015. It was actually commissioned by the DCLG at that time. There was a rogue Lib Dem that wanted to cut, and they said, yeah, just kind of do it. But it was published, and it's like amazing. And then the government changed, so nothing's kind of been done with it. But I've been kind of writing, and it got into the social housing green paper, which I was really, really happy that they had listened to me. But what it looked at was being able to you know, there was a case study done by the University of Westminster, which is where I went for my master's. But it looked at Amicus Horizon, and they were able to demonstrate through their mechanisms of measuring the value for money that their tenant involvement structures saved the business, and it came out at 2.2 million a year. It was absolutely mind-blowing. So in the green paper, there was a section, because I pushed to get it in, about having that value for money measure against tenant involvement. And for me, and there's nothing in there. There's like nothing in the white paper about that. So I kind of wrote about it yesterday, and I think that is a huge trick that the sector is missing, that it is a value for money measure, and being able to measure something. And just because it's hard, and it's not a hard statistic to measure, there are social value measures, there are other measures, but to be able to capture that and to be able to get that buy-in is super important. And yeah, so I don't even know if I've answered your question, but
no. It's interesting because there's a question that's been raised whilst you were talking, and I think it's very much a supplementary from what we just said there, which is tenant apathy is an issue. HAs delude themselves that a small minority are representative of the tenant base. How do we avoid that bias when taking influence from tenants? And I think it is a supplementary to that first question, because you can imagine if you are sampling a small base and you're looking at technology to engage with tenants, you could actually choose something that doesn't work for everyone. So how talk about that tenant apathy, or how HAs can get more involvement.
Well, the issue is they you know, it's kind of a running theme. You know, how do you get engagement? You know, and there are organizations that absolutely actively want to you know, have engagement. You are never going to engage the whole tenant thing. There are people that are in their house, they're grateful for their house. I mean, it's like, for me, I am really grateful that I have people that are on my council, or on my kids' school council, right? You know, the kind of governance. I don't want to participate, but I'm really happy that someone is participating for me. So when you ask the question on a survey, are you happy that there is like a, you know, tenant involvement? Are you happy? And the answer is categorically yes. So people are happy that other people are able to do it if they don't want to do it. And then the other thing is actually building capacity for tenants to be involved. I mean, for me, I came in as a tenant. I was homeless, pregnant with my second child, and I was housed by my now housing association. And I got involved with co-regulation because it was 2011 that I was housed, and then I just kind of got swept up with the whole co-regulation stuff. But so they trained me, but my main barrier was childcare. So they covered my childcare for me to be involved. And it just so happened that I had the skills in my previous life in LA that I was able to bring to the table. And then they also provided more training. So I think in answer to your kind of question, I know I'm kind of just rambling, is that there's never going to be everyone that wants to be involved. You have to have several mechanisms for people to be involved. A lot of online technology for being able to do temperature checks, all of that is way behind. And I think that we need to be more agile in how to capture stuff. So, if you've got a long survey, most of the time I just delete it. Like, I just can't be bothered because it's just too, if you have stuff that is really quick, if you want to, temperature check people, so you can ask, do you want to be involved? Can you be involved by answering surveys?
That was something I was going to ask about, because you raised the point about tenant surveys, and of course we're at a conference, focusing a little bit on data. So you just highlighted that point, that if the questioning is incorrect, or if the survey is too bulky or big, then actually when you don't get people responding, or you get incomplete responses, the data could effectively tell you that your tenant base is apathetic.
Yeah. Or, so you say, are you happy with your service? Well, that's the kind of follow-up question, because what they want in their KPIs and their annual report is that we have 98% satisfaction rate. So, but there's no kind of delineation when I get that phone call. I mean, I don't actually get repairs anymore because I'm a shared owner, but when I did, so they'll say, were you happy with your service? I'm really happy that there's this kind of no breakdown. I was really happy that it was fixed, but it took 4 times to fix it. And I was really happy with the actual guy that came to fix it the last time because he had the right tools, but I'm actually not happy with the length that it took. So just kind of asking that yes, no question is just a tick box for me.
So it's more the subtlety of how your question. I mean, there's definitely been a thread that's come out of what we're talking about here, because someone else has raised a question. What do you make of biscuit and tea, in inverted commas, tenant engagement? Are they taken for granted and classed with both hands, but looked down upon at the same time as being seen or presented as just representative?
Yep, I think tea and biscuit. But the issue is then what do you do with that information?
Explain to those who might not know what biscuit and tea tenant engagement is.
Okay, so it's just the it's kind of the usual suspects, and it's kind of stereotyping here, but older, retired, busybody tenants coming to the table, sitting around, nattering away. And then the landlord can just tick box and say, look, we've had some tenant engagement, and like nothing comes of it. It's about having, and then also in 2015, when all of the stuff was kind of focused on value for money and governance, and the whole, consumer standard was just not, like, a lot of those positions that were supporting that tenant community function were just gotten rid of. There was a lot of unemployment, a lot of we're not investing in that anymore. And so having someone that understands how that then feeds into the business, I think that those voices are useful, but you need other voices. So, I mean, when I was working in my housing association, they had a disability forum, they had a youth forum, they had other groups that would feed in, but then what is done with that? I mean, just to have the groups and then have nothing done with it. Having a scrutiny panel, I was chair of a scrutiny panel for 3 years. I was on the scrutiny panel for 5 years. We did several scrutinies where we looked at areas of the business that didn't work. I mean, there was one thing where they were printing out, it was just a default, printing out 2 letters. And so you would get two letters every time. And then we pointed it out and then they changed it. So it's just, but what change are you going to see at the end of it?
Yeah. So is it, I mean, we're obviously been going through COVID since March, and the rules of work and the way we engage with each other have radically changed. I mean, let's face it, here we are, this is the third Uncon. Uncon was created because there was no physical events that could go on, and people were expressing frustration about not being able to network. Is it a case that we're still thinking old world, to use a terrible phrase, about how we can engage with tenants, because if we're taking as read that tenant engagement is really vital if we're planning, you know, how we're going to bring new technology that's going to, you know, maybe drive more self-service to tenants and things like that. If we take that as read, should we not be looking at how we can bring tenants into Zoom consultations, or just, you know, is there something that we're just not fundamentally understanding how we should be engaging, or is it just
I
that?
well, I mean, I think, you know, I've been quite ill through all of this. So, I mean, I've been kind of watching from my sick bed, but I think, you know, just the overall reaction to the sector has been quite good. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of, I think COVID, kind of looking back, I think in a few years, I think COVID has forced housing associations to deal with remote working, with agile working, they using technology, looking at innovation. I mean, I think that in, you know, hindsight, we will see that this was a monumental moment of change, and not just bums in seats at the office. You have to be in the office. And I think that it's going to change the way that tenants are. I mean, I've just been seeing that some organizations that already have really good tenant involvement have been having Zoom meetings, have been having coffee and chats, and checking in. And I think there's going to be a lot of white paper analysis. I think Soha have just sent something out on Twitter yesterday about their tenants being involved. And it's also about, you know, the stuff that Gabby's PhD was on about, you know, digital inclusion and really looking at skilling tenants and also the kind of wider community up for kind of where we're headed. For example, my dad absolutely hated being on a computer. But after my mother died, it just kind of sat there, you know, being dusty. But we got him an iPad, and then he was shopping for, like, you know,
I'm really, really glad you raised that point, because it's a perennial conversation point amongst people who work in technology in the sector. It's, are we missing a trick when we ask tenants about how they engage digitally? You know, we see some questions where it's, you know, how do you access the internet? And they use that term, the internet. And tenants come back with, we don't. Whereas the public, actually, if you said to them, do you access Facebook or Twitter or TikTok? They'll go, yes, because they've got a smartphone.
I mean, and that's who I was talking to a chief exec last night. And he said that when they, exactly that question, that when they asked about, you know, do you have broadband, do you get on the internet? You know, the majority of tenants said no. When they turned around and asked them, do you have a smartphone? Do you use Facebook? 73% said yes. And then they developed an app. So you know, people aren't going to go on, you know, maybe go on a laptop, but you can also access Zoom through your phone. You know, I've been at times having Zoom calls on my phone because I can't, you know, be bothered to get my laptop out. But then if you have an app, kind of like the banking app, I mean, all of my banking is done through my app, and I kind of see it on a daily basis what I'm doing. So if we, I mean, I think that we can use the technology that supermarkets are doing. I mean, the supermarkets have been absolutely phenomenal on their online stuff. I mean, all of the you know, retail sector has had to respond agilely to, you know, having to do click and collect or be online. They've had to absolutely have that infrastructure. And I think a lot of the housing associations have dinosaur infrastructure that can't actually have the capacity to deal with that. So it's almost like, to me, they need to kind of just burn it to the ground and start over and really invest in IT, because it's like, oh, my IT's down, or, you know, it's like living with the dinosaur mechanisms and then trying to add new and innovative. So it's not going to work. So there needs to be some kind of, you know, the IT has to be right, and the kind of baseline has to be right.
Okay.
For all this stuff to go on top. Does that make sense?
No, definitely. We've got some more questions here. Okay. So the question at the top is, do we have enough people in HAs who can get under the skin of data? Who are these people? Are they techies or people who have more frontline housing management experience?
I don't think it's the front line, but I think it should be. And I think there should be training on it. I mean, I'm really excited about the data, and I kind of think of the, you know, the kind of data people in their, you know, crazy little corner box office doing the crazy stuff, and like no one is just, you know, it's almost like, you know, they're really, really important, but like nobody else kind of knows what they do. And it's about being able to share that information. And I think if people were able to access, to be able to kind of see the data and then see how it can be used to influence or unpick or use as a can opener to ask questions. And I think there's a huge disconnect. And I think that that's missing a trick.
So do you think there's this kind of crossover? You're not looking for techies, but you're not necessarily looking for straight housing management experience. It's almost like, great if you've worked in the front line, but you need to be tech curious because you've got to see the connection.
Well, no, I mean, I think that what I'm saying is that the frontline people need to be trained. So, I mean, it's, and I think what the frontline people do are absolutely amazing, but I think it's the kind of disconnect, but also, you know, if you come into housing and you're, you know, a frontline, you know, working with rents or whatever, you're just kind of in your own silo. And I think for me, you know, having everyone have training to kind of see the bigger picture, like how their job affects all the other, it's all interconnected. And I think the silo working is like going to be the death of it. And I think if you can see the bigger picture, like I'm kind of a strategist, and I like to see the overview and be able to have people talk to each other. And I think HR can be quite a stranglehold on, and the kind of structure within the organization can be a stranglehold. So I'm thinking that, I think IT and tech is super important, but I think that it needs to have like, you know, tech for dummies, you know, like the whole, you know, that kind of training to kind of see how, you know, to be able to create the story of why it's important.
I'm going to assume then that you think there's also not enough of these people in HA.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, you know, more investment needs to be made. I think, you know, investment in IT and the tech and getting it right, and getting, you know, if it's like building a house on sand, if you don't have the infrastructure or the kind of platform that, you know, I mean, the stuff that I've worked in, it's like, oh, there's always these glitches and you have to find the workaround. And when you're new, you're going to have to, oh, well, you have to do it this way because this thing doesn't quite work. And it's just, people get on with it, but it's just clunky. And I think that tech has a huge job to do if they're allowed to do it.
I mean, you've just spoken about, you know, needing more data people. They need to have better training. There's a question that's popped up here, and it's interesting because it's anonymous. Data massaging. Is this something we do too much of? How can we prevent this creeping in?
I think it is massaged. And I think, well, I mean, the thing is, we see it in the government, and they're, you know, I'm, you know, and also, you know, I'm dual national. So please feel sorry for me at the moment with the kind of craziness that's going on. So, I mean, like I'm shouting at the TV, that's not right. You know, it's the doctors. And the thing is that everyone's massaging the figures to fit their own narrative. And it's, you know, we're just kind of living in this really divisive world that everyone is just digging in. And, you know, well, you know, we have this data. And I also think they've kind of massaged the data, and I'm going to do some more investigating, this obsession with the government, with home ownership. They use this, you know, no one in the road shows, and I went to 7, I co-facilitated 7 out of the 10 of those road shows. No one mentioned, oh, I wanted, you know, home ownership was one of the 10. Like, it didn't even come up. It wasn't even in the top 3. No one talked about it. And it's, you know, chapter 7 in this document. So I'm going back to the, you know, the green paper, and I'm doing some digging, and it's on this one survey that was taken that they've 2/3, this whole tackle, 2/3 of social housing people want to own, you know, and I think it was just an arbitrary question. If you had the choice, and I'm going to go digging because I want to really find out, but people are believing this. The government is driving their whole building policy and you know, and just ignoring that people are homeless and the whole catastrophe that is about to happen. And they're just built, you know, yeah.
There was some comments yesterday. I think it came out in the panel debate. This idea that there are technologies, you know, starting to come out that are using things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. We have to be very careful because it's very early stage in those technologies. But you know, as long as they're built correctly without biases, you know, maybe there's a potential through those sorts of techs to get away from this massaging, because it'll effectively, you know, if it's not built with a bias and it's doing the right thing, it'll just present the data to you unfiltered and unmassaged so that you can then use it in the right way rather than it going through a kind of spin cycle.
Yeah, but you know, the issue is that I always say what get measured matters. And housing associations now, because they've become, you know, they're not reliant on government funding, their social purpose has been squeezed within an inch of its life, and they're having to demonstrate value for money. Like, how are they sweating their assets? How are they doing it? And they're under so much pressure from, you know, to jump through these hoops that a lot of it is just tick box. They're just, you know, having to jump to the tune of the regulator, where, you know, actually I think you know, this same chief exec that I talked to yesterday, when he became chief exec, there was a senior executive that left, and then he kind of realized quite quickly that things were untangling, and he reported himself and the organization to the regulator, and they got downgraded. But it's like about being confident enough in your abilities to turn stuff around and not trying to hide it and not trying to bury it. And I think that kind of, you know, more transparency, and that's what you're seeing. I think there's a lot of stuff in the white paper I still have to kind of dig over, but this forcing housing associations to be more transparent about salaries, about stuff that's going on, how money is being spent. And I think that is going to, I think transparency is the key. And I think there's some nuggets in there that is going to intrinsically change the industry.
Well, it's interesting. We're coming towards the end, but there's a question that's, funny enough, has just said that regarding the white paper. Do you think that the new rules regarding transparency and freedom of information style regs will plunge HAs into either chaos or get their act together on transparency?
I think both. I think they're freaking out. And you know, for me, this is just intention at the moment. It's like the devil's in the details. And I really think that if tenants are involved and are at the table of those conversations, the regulator, I think, you know, the regulator needs to absolutely have the funding. If it's not funded, it's not going to work, you know? And I think that if, like I said, what gets measured matters. And if they know that, you know, they have to show transparency. And I think that there's going to be, you know, I think for me as a woman, I know that there's gender pay differences. I think there's, you know, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see if they have to, you know, publish to the world who is getting paid what. I think, you know, I think they're freaking out.
I like it. That's a good quote. HAs are freaking out over the white paper. We've got about a minute left, but I think the last word should go to you on this one. You know, we've already talked about it at length, but I think it's important to kind of bookend it. Beyond the data makes me think very much about who it affects. How important is it to always have a tenant perspective on the tech we use? So it's the last word for you, Leslie, on that.
I think that's the key. And that's the key we have to keep. That, you know, they kind of say tenants at the heart of everything we do, but actually without that in mind, it's kind of pointless.
I like that. So without putting tenants at the heart of it, it's pointless.
Yeah.
Right. We'll take that then, Leslie. So thank you very much for that. We're literally at 10:59, so we've done really well. That kind of flew through, and thanks everyone for putting those questions up. So once again, thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you for coming on and being our keynote and kicking off day 2. I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope that I brought something that everyone can take away. and that I kind of made some sense today. Thank you.
No worries. And make sure if you're on social media, you follow Leslie. She tweets all the time. So we're going to take a break now. I'm just clicking on the agenda, so I've got to use my own technology. We've now got a break for 30 minutes. One of the great things about the Uncon is, you know, you can go out and network, meet your peers, say hello to the sponsors. It's what we're all about. Get those conversations continuing. I'm sure Leslie will be floating about in the conference area, so please take the time to go along and say hello to her. And then when we come back at 11:30, it's been wildly trailed on social media, so I'm hoping for something really good. We're going to have Ryan Dempsey of the Compliance Workbook. Okay, so see you all at 11:30. Thanks so much. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
Bye.